We will call to order the June 26th, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting. The Nebraska Open Meetings Act legislates the methods by which public meetings are conducted. Information pertaining to this act is available on the
back. There.
whole back here, this direction today. All right, Sheila, can we do roll call?
Justin Thompson.
Present.
Joanne Lingreen.
Present.
Emily Garrett.
Present.
Cindy O'Connor.
Present.
Skip Alton.
Present.
Present.
All right, here's our mission statement. North Platte Public Schools is a destination school district in community that embraces innovative opportunities and distinguished programs to create highly competitive advantages for all students, instilling the canteen spirit in an evolving world. The canteen spirit embodies generosity, selflessness, and unwavering support through service, pride, collaboration, and grit. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the publication of the June 26, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the publication for the June 26, 2025 Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Roll call.
Joanne Lingreen.
Aye.
Emily Garrett.
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor.
Aye.
Skip Alton.
Aye.
Andrew Blasey.
Aye.
Justin Thompson.
Aye.
And at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda of the June 26, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda of the June 26, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting.
Second.
Roll call.
Emily Garrett.
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor.
Aye.
Skip Alton.
Aye.
Andrew Blasey.
Aye.
Justin Thompson.
Aye.
Joanne Lingreen.
Aye.
All right, at this time, please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we wanted to start this evening off with a special recognition. So for those of you who don't know in the room, which I can't imagine who that would be at this point, but this is Stuart's last meeting with us at a board meeting.
And I ended on the Committee of the Whole.
Yeah. So we did want to just take a moment, Stuart, to recognize you for all of your years of service in the district, and thank you for that time. And we do have a card and a gift for you from the board. There's that for you. Yeah, thank you. We appreciate you. And if anyone on the board would like to say any words to Stuart, the floor is open at this
Cindy,
point.
shush.
Yeah, have you prepared a speech?
Stuart, this is tater tots, and there's some of the ingredients
Tater
in
tot
there.
casserole.
These are recipes that are from the Jefferson School recipe book from,
Good enough.
it's years ago, but you'll recognize some of the names on that.
Some of them you don't know, but tater tot casserole is the most amazing thing in the cafeteria.
Serving at the school, they really are. It is.
I want to thank Stuart for all his years. I met Stuart when he first came here, 19 and a half years ago, on the other side.
Yes, we were. Well, once again, we're still.
Yeah, but also, you know, he was the finance director, and when I was coaching, of course, I had to deal with that. But I also negotiated for the teachers, and so we negotiated, and I always found him honest. He has integrity, and while you are being replaced, you will be missed.
Thank you.
Well, I have one story.
Is it clean?
Just one.
Well, it's kind of clean.
Turn the recorder on.
No, that's okay. Because I worked in the district for 1 year before Stuart was hired. And they were bringing all these people in to interview, and us girls in the office, I don't know if Sheila was in the office, we would look them over as they were going in, and we would write on the paper if they were a 1 or a 2, and then we'd hold it up after. So Stuart did get the highest point.
Sheila,
He was wearing a pink tie.
I was going to say, Sheila's always been impressed that I wore a pink tie on my interview day. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, Stuart, as a board member, I'm very grateful that you are very good at replying to emails and helping explain things. That's very helpful, especially to board members who don't know what's going on when they come in. Appreciate you.
And I appreciate all of the time and effort that you put in as well, too.
We've gone to a few meetings together.
We've gone to a few meetings
Yes.
together, so, and it's been good. I've enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know your family, and it's been good working with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, for board engagement tonight, I would like to go ahead and start this off with Cindy and Joanne and myself all attended the school law conference, and so I wanted to go ahead and provide a report on kind of what we took away from that conference to the rest of the board, and then after that, we will still open up the floor if anybody has anything else that they want to share, but I wanted to prioritize making sure that we relayed that information. Joanne, do you want to start us off with those?
Sure. So we have kind of divided and conquered. It was a all-day meeting. It was very good. A lot of school law, but very informative. So our very first session was with the Perry Law Firm, and they were talking a little bit about some of the bills. They said that there were 30 new laws that were passed that will affect schools. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of those. One is LB 89, and that is the Stand With Women Act. And it becomes effective, he said, roughly September 2nd. It was the third attempt at a similar bill, and it defines male and female. It applies only to interscholastic competitions. So intramural sports, activities, it does not apply to those. And it applies to both public and private schools. And this is K all the way up through the college level. So, and there is, if you look at the bill, there's a very specific definition of what a male is and what a female is, and what constitutes it's boys, men, and male, maybe, I can't remember exactly, and then there's female, girls, and women in the bill, and so your sports are either male or female, and there are some that can be co-ed. There are people that asked, what those might be, and the attorney suggested maybe in unified sports, bowling, and some of those types of things. There's likely to be co-ed sports, and there's still some questions about how this aligns with the NSAA definitions. And one of the interesting components of this bill is that female sports are female only. However, as long as it's not a contact sport and there is no girls sport available, the girls can try out for the boys team. So an example I could think of would be tennis, for example. If there's not a girls tennis team, then they could try out for the boys tennis team. They said that there will be, the NSAA is still using the 2016 definitions, and so they said there will probably be new definitions soon. The KSB group, they also brought it up in the afternoon. And I don't remember that they had a whole lot more to add other than what was already said. So the next one that I wanted to mention was LB 306, and that one is in effect now, and that one has to do with enrolling part-time students for purposes of extracurriculars. And one of the things I've thought, because I know in the time that I've been on the board, we, for instance, one year had a couple of students from Ogallala participating in our swim team. And so I feel like we've been pretty good at working with schools when they don't have opportunities for their students. But that's primarily what this bill is about, not charging parochial school or homeschool students. And then there's also some interesting pieces with the student could live in the North Platte School District, for example, but maybe be closer to Hershey, and so they could choose to participate with Hershey if distance-wise they're closer. So, and they said, one of the things they pointed out, that as far as they know, this doesn't apply to junior high, but he said that there's still a lot of questions with that. And then LB 390, and this one goes into effect the 26-27 school year, and this we will have to have a policy that creates a catalog of all of the books in the library at each school. We don't have this situation, but I thought it was interesting that if the library is on school property, then those books have to be cataloged. So if it was a city library, but it was on school property, then we would have to catalog those books. So we don't, like I said, we don't have that situation. And then there's also a part of the bill that says that we would have to give parents information about the books that their students are checking out. We would have to notify them. And KSB, when they talked about it, they said, you know, if every parent doesn't want notification, it doesn't necessarily say that every parent has to be notified every time, but that I think there's going to probably be some more clarifications coming on all of the stipulations around the bill. So anyway, it was also very interesting that he did not bring up the cell phone bill, but I think he knows that they know that one's has been pretty well advertised across the state. So anyway.
Yeah, I also thought that was interesting. It wasn't even mentioned as a topic of conversation, which was kind of crazy. The other bills I won't dive into too much because we've heard about them pretty extensively, I think, from Skip and legislative updates, but they did talk a little bit about the school retirement bill and the changes that were made to that, how that could impact difficulties in knowing how to set your budget depending on when you find that information out. They also talked about some changes in language of policy, which we'll see as far as when it comes to surveys that are given to students, those kinds of things. There's some more specific language in that. And then another topic that was brought up both in our legislative update and it had its own entire session was about medical marijuana and just the potential impact that is going to have on schools, because we do have students that are 18 and older, and really being intentional and putting some thought into the policies that we put in place when that does become a thing, because there is a lot of discretion that schools can have from the sounds of it. The language that is currently out there is very vague, so there's kind of a lot currently left open to interpretation, but right now they're kind of waiting for, there's a board that is supposed to kind of set the standards.
Yeah, they're supposed to come out, I think, this week.
Yes.
With their recommendations.
Thought the deadline was July 1st, and it sounds like they're gonna be ahead of that deadline.
Yeah.
So either probably tomorrow or
Yeah, tomorrow
or Monday, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yep. So that'll just be something to have on our radar that will probably be a big issue that we'll have to address as a board. Other than that, they did talk a lot about both from a legislative update with LB 241, but then also just in protecting student data was its own session. And so just really making sure that we're diligent as a district when we do have, you know, technology, software, things that we're subscribing to, really making sure that we understand what their safeguards are in place, how they're protecting our data, who owns that data, making sure that we own our data. And, you know, obviously they shared with us the situation with Power School and all of that. And it was literally just one employee who didn't have the two-factor authentication, not thinking of the right word, in place, and that is how all of that data was accessed. So that was a big topic and actually very educational. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't even know were good questions to ask. And then talked a lot about parental rights in schools. That was kind of a theme in some of the bills that were brought forth this year, whether it be, you know, being able to see lesson plans or library, all of those kinds of things. All right, I got a lot of notes. It was like a crazy day of information. And then they did talk a little bit about just kind of how the whole process of DOGE is impacting federal aid, how it's impacting, you know, how we might be scrutinized and looking at our spending, and just really kind of this focus on making sure that government bodies are operating in an efficient manner. And he actually took a lot of time to really kind of clarify what some of the executive orders from the president really meant, and how a lot of that was taken out of context from both sides. And so just kind of hearing that clarified language, I think there's a lot of scare tactics around how that's communicated, and realizing like, this is what was said, this is what it means, this is what it means for us as a school district. And then I think, Cindy, you were going to share about the immigration and the I-9s, and
gonna share
she's
about
our payroll expert, so we'll let her
Yeah,
speak that
whatever.
language.
The attorneys were talking about, there was one food plant manufacturer in Omaha on June 10th that got raided. And that when we were at the seminar, they said that there were still 74 individuals being held, and that their social security numbers that they had were not really social security numbers for these people. The attorneys did tell us that we should have our I-9s up to date, that they feel that the feds are going to do some audits, are going to ramp up on the I-9s. They suggested that we go through them, make sure they're in order, that they're easy access. They also suggested that we should have a general policy if law enforcement does show up at our school. They said also, when they request the I-9s, they only give you 3 days to get this lined up. Also they wanted to line up with payroll. They talked about foreign teachers, and to make sure that if they have work visas, that they are in order and the paperwork is in the files. Make sure that if they have a work authorization, it hasn't expired. That if they have a 2-year working visa, to make sure we know when it runs out. And they just really emphasized that they felt that the I-9s were going to be an issue. So,
And just a note on immigration, President Trump today just announced that they're going to be hiring 10,000 more ICE agents.
yes.
And so
Yes.
that was just an announcement he made today. So he's definitely serious about getting immigration issues under control. One other thing I wanted to mention too was I thought it was really interesting. I didn't realize how closely all of the school attorneys worked together.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was something that was mentioned several times as each of them got up, just that, you know, that they work really closely to help schools in Nebraska make sure that we're understanding our responsibilities and the laws and the things that we need to do, so.
I had a couple more. I found the rest of my notes on the medical marijuana thing, and there were a couple things that I thought were mention worthy as well. because it was a topic I think they were excited to talk about. They were very creative with the title of the session, which was called Doobie Doos and Doobie Don'ts. Very proud of that. But basically the idea that, first of all, currently there are no dispensaries in Nebraska, so there can be no patients that have authorization for medical marijuana at this point. But there are currently 12 states that do actually allow medical marijuana on school property. The way things are written currently in Nebraska, it's not addressed. However, it is illegal at the federal level. And so when you're talking about being a school entity that receives federal funding, if you are doing something that's illegal federally, you are at risk of losing your federal funding. So they were pretty in favor of not allowing it on your school grounds for that reason. They also did mention that you also don't have to allow, even if it's medical marijuana by somebody in the public, you do not have to allow them to use it on school grounds because they can leave school grounds to do what they need to do. So I just thought that was really interesting, but the federal funding piece was something that really stood out to me because I think that could really become a hot button issue, and that's something that we'll want to really consider. That would be a very big deal to lose that. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Is there anything else that you guys?
I'll just say with that one, the highlight was they said, do consult with your school attorney and don't forget to consult with your school attorney. So the do and the don't.
Cindy, did you have anything else from the conference?
No,
Okay.
I'm good.
I think it was really great the three of you went to that. I do. I really do. Thank you for the information.
Yeah, it was good. It was very informational.
Yeah.
It's very good. All right. Does anybody else have anything to share during board engagement this evening?
No schools that does it.
Well, last month when we were at Jefferson, I toured the school then afterwards, and I did not realize all the different halls they had.
Yeah.
I was very going in and out of places, and then we came out to another hallway, and I was a little.
It's kind of a maze.
But yeah, it was. I really just love these community rooms being at the schools so that we can see those, because it is hard for me to get away from work, and nobody wants me to bring 10 extra kids into the building. So it is really nice that we can then tour.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I also appreciate that. I was not able to stay that night due to T-ball obligations. However, I do appreciate that because it is hard sometimes to get away when you're working and have little ones and all of that. Yes, absolutely. All right, anybody else? Okay, we will move on to public comment. Public questions and comments may take place at this time in the agenda. Individuals who want to address the board must complete a guidelines for public comments form with the date, topic addressing, name, address, and the name of any organization you represent, and give it to the board clerk prior to the meeting.
I have none.
Okay. On to the rest of our agenda then. We will start this evening with our Cody Elementary site plan presentation. So we have Ms. Smiley, Ms. Thomas, and Ms. Stuck. You guys will present to us. We're looking forward to it.
Okay, you can head to the next slide. And so what we're gonna go over, so I'm Ms. Smiley, so we all know. We're gonna talk about who our guiding coalition team is, our vision statement and what our commitments are, and then our attendance goal, behavior goal, and specific goal for our external review. And all of this that we've done up here is based on our staff. So they all helped come up with all of these things so everyone's on the same page. So we did lots of work, and it was really good to see everybody come together.
No, it's so nice to be part of the whole in this and having the collaboration and knowing exactly what's going on, and then the fidelity in the building because we're all on the same page made a huge impact on our students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody had skin in the game.
And so this is the members of our team. So this is Mrs. Thomas, this is Mrs. Stumpf, and Ms. Smiley. And so we have also Amanda Condon, Melissa Hopping, and Whitney Petzka that are also part of our team. And so it's really nice to have that small group to really go over like our data, to kind of, you guys are good to get a feeler to see how things are going, because I don't always get that. And so it's just a really good small team to really look at those things. So next slide.
they empowerment students to communicate and collaborate in positive ways. So we really wanted to hit those fundamentals that you, the board, have created, also reflecting in our budget.
And I will say this, the vision and those commitments took a lot of time from the staff, and like they all really had a lot to say. So it's really nice to see them all come together and figure out really what's important to them and what they agreed to work towards.
I think one of the positive takeaways with it is we kind of have it down to our C's of Cody. So a lot of it dealt with the letter C, so our C's of Cody really tied it in together.
Our C's of Cody are the connect, compete, and create. So that's our theme. I feel like I have a theme going on, so I did really go with that. Next slide.
So one of our commitments that we stated that we honed in on is we will always be positive leaders, role models, and create positive relationships among all stakeholders, so students, teachers, staff members, even members of the community who deal with Cody, partnering with our partners. We all want to have that positive relationship with them. Having high expectations in all areas to create an intrinsically motivated learners, develop and implement a school-wide behavior expectations, implement engaging curriculum with fidelity, which was our big indicator there, work collaboratively with all stakeholders, analyze data to provide means for academic success for all students, and provide students opportunities to be creative in their learning.
And so attendance is one of our first goals. And the goal is to decrease the number of students who miss 20 or plus days. We had quite a few of those, and our main thing, like our school goal was to get under 17. And I really appreciate the work that the student services did to provide us with a bunch of data about COE specifically, to be able to look at that, and that's how our team identified this is what we wanted to look at, because having a lot of those students, we had 20 more that had missed 20 plus days, that's a big chunk of your population, and so we really wanted to figure out how can we change that and get students here more often. And so we focused in on check in and check out with the staff members, so identifying those kids who do miss a lot of more days, and we pair up staff members, build those relationships to get them to want to be here, and the parents are getting them here, getting them to want to be here, and motivate them to get them here. And then monthly attendance and celebrations, we celebrate those. We post them on Facebook so parents can see too. We do individual classroom attendance board systems for the whole class, so teachers really took that upon themselves to individualize that in their own classrooms. And so, do you want to talk about what they see with that?
So we saw a huge number rise in our population of students actually being here. A few things that a few grade levels did. I know I would have a certain number of days that I wanted perfect attendance. When we hit that, we would have a celebration, whether it was a hat day, whether it was treats for the classroom that day, whether it was something that we could have fun with, or even just extra recess. That was really motivating to the students having that. Second grade did very similar things. First grade had very similar things, and we saw that number percentage rise as the year went on versus last year.
And it kind of got into a competitive
Yes.
too toward the end of the year to see who had the most attendance really going. So it was really fun.
We did quarterly, we checked to see what grade level had the most attendance, and what's a percentage, and so they really did enjoy those our assemblies to figure that out. And then they get a reward for quarterly too. And so then we also communicate with parents, so that usually comes from me. Sometimes the teachers reach out to you if the kids are missing consecutive days. They'll check in with them, see what they can do to help the kids. But we do our attendance plans. Once they hit 10 days, we're making sure that we send out a letter letting them know, and then we're going to come together, make a collaborative plan. We get them here, and then we send the letters from 5 to 9. We do lots of
So behavior. So we wanted to reduce the number of defiance referrals to be lower than 255. So what we did is that we would define the defiance, how acceptance for Swiss documents, I apologize, creating behavior contracts and plans for students once they did reach those 5 behavior referrals. Our whole school did a voice count skill with me, which was really cool. So Miss Smiley would send out the morning announcement, and in that announcement would have our voice count skill, and so everybody would hear it, and all the directions, determine what the steps are, kind of, and we have those conversations with the kids. We have monthly meetings to review behavior data, and one of the nicest things is that we did as a team is that to make this goal, we sat down and defined it. We really defined it. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What are we confusing a defiance behavior for something else? And so when we were able to look at the baseline of that behavior, we really were able to see a decrease in our numbers because of that. So that was really helpful to see.
And I know Linda's going to talk about it in the next goal with our external review. Our MTSS process really helped also with the behavior and going over like the students once they reached that 5, referrals and creating a plan for them because the team came together. We came up with what can we do for the student and how do we support and intervene before it gets to be such a problem. Anything else to add?
So our next specific goal dealt with MTSS. So our goal was to improve the accuracy and effectiveness of student referrals by utilizing multiple data points in the MTSS meetings to identify the needs for intervention or further assessment. So what we really did is we looked at the documents for reporting data. So we really honed in not just on one bullet point, which in the past that's kind of what we were looking at, to different modes, our CSAs, our CFAs, our data that came from INSCAS, DIBBLs, in multiple opportunities to really bring that in. And we actually streamlined it into a spreadsheet. Sorry about that. So on our spreadsheet, we had our things up to date filled out. We had a specific date when we needed our MTSS paperwork filled out. So when we arrived at the meeting, it wasn't that we were writing as teachers with a packet of paperwork going, let's start looking through. Everything was streamlined. Everything was up. It was very, very productive this year. I was very proud of our effort coming from a person who loves to look at data. So again, like the things we utilized was our INSCAS data, our DIBBLs data, our common summative assessments, intervention data, and behavior data. And what I really loved about these takeaways is we were really able to impact our students. We were able to look at the interventions we were doing and going, okay, do we need to do an intervention plan change? How many people have we been doing this intervention? And just seeing the productive work that it was and how it was impacting students was phenomenal versus previous years. I love the work that we had done as a staff at Cody for our MTSS process.
We hit that right on the head. I think the staff did such a good job, and like they were so willing to, because I worked on the document, and they were willing to adapt to change, which is really nice, because sometimes when you have a lot of data to look at, it can be overwhelming, but it really does help in the process of really figuring out what we need to be doing and what we are doing and keeping it organized. I think it did help with our referrals. Does anyone have questions for us?
I don't really have any questions. There are 3 things I want to say. 1, I love your enthusiasm for what you are doing. That was very evident in your presentation. I think that is great. Secondly, I really like that we have teachers that come and help with the presentation. And the third thing is you have results that you showed us. And I think that is great. Really good.
Good things are happening, sir.
Anyone else?
I just have a comment too. One of the things that I've noticed, and this is just kind of as we've been seeing these site visit presentations, I can see how unifying this is for your building, and I think that's really exciting. I'm excited to see over this next school year what it does for your students. So I'm really excited to see next year's results. So.
Year too. It's been a nice foundation year and really building that.
I really like your vision statement, and I've probably said this in like every school we've been in so far, but it's really cool to me to see, we have this unified strategic plan, and we have aligned curriculum, and we have all of these things that make us a big district, and we're all moving in the same direction. But we really can't ignore the fact that all of our buildings have a different culture. You have a different base of teachers, you have different administration, you have different student population. And I feel like your vision really captures who I feel like the staff at Cody is. Like, you guys are a very creative group of teachers. You create experiences like that. Totally, if I were to think how I would describe the strengths in your building, like to me that captures it. So I just think that that's really cool that we have buildings that are really not doing things different for the sake of doing things different, but doing things different for the sake of capitalizing on your strengths as a building. So I really appreciated that. Anyone else have any questions, comments? Thank you guys so much for coming. We appreciate it. Okay, on to our continued budget conversation for tonight. So just for those who may not be aware, who are tuning into the meeting or here in the audience, we did start a pretty in-depth budget conversation at our workshop here just a couple weeks ago. And so this is a continuation of that conversation. At that time, we were presented with a packet of budget information and kind of a proposed budget, and then the board had some questions, some suggestions, and so this is kind of round 2 of that conversation, and depending on where we go from here, the board may or may not decide to have an additional workshop to further this conversation, or we may decide that we kind of feel comfortable moving forward with the ideas presented. So Stuart, I will turn this over to you for our last big budget conversation with you.
So first of all, just a reminder, we had a budget workshop on June 5th, and we went through this full budget packet, sort of laying in the groundwork as far as how a budget is built from the standpoint of all the revenue that comes in, as well as all the expenditures that we have to address, whether it's salaries or liability insurance or utilities or whatever else. And so we really took some time and went through that. The other piece that really is contingent upon any school district or really any public entity is valuations. And I always project a 2% increase because I don't want us to get caught upside down in regards to we were projecting 10% and all of a sudden it came in at 5%. So we want to try conservatively and then build from there on where it should be. When we were doing that, though, we knew that preliminary valuations would come in around the 15th. So on the 16th of June, we received preliminary valuations, and those are attached to the document. And I included not only just sort of the summary of the preliminary valuations, but also the letters from last year and this year from Julie Stinger, so that you can see sort of what we received and get an idea of what we're putting together. So with that, you can see it broken down as far as all the valuations are concerned. But the bottom line is that we're only going to see roughly a 3.8% increase in valuations. Now, that's current. Last year we saw a 10% on adjusted or on preliminary, and then all of a sudden we saw only an 8% increase. So this is tentative. That could drop down a little bit, but starting the conversation now gives you some idea that valuations are going up. It could be between the 2 to 3% range, but we just want to make sure that everybody knows we have some preliminary valuations out there. So with that, we went off the premise of what we did last year, which was a really good discussion that we had with the board as far as where we've been, what we discussed, and sort of some of the options that we can do. And so let me just take you through some of those thoughts, and then I'll turn it over to the board. So first of all, you can see what we set for 24-25 and the levy accordingly. So then on June 5th, which is right here, we had we had proposed property taxes for the general fund, special building fund, and the QC Puff fund. With that, I have now the new valuation or the new preliminary valuation plugged in there, and what levy information will drive this budget accordingly. So, going from 0.94 down to 0.92 in the levy. So we had some conversations at the budget workshop. One was possibly reducing the special building fund by roughly a penny and moving it into the general fund and keeping the same dollars the same. So you can see still keeping this levy the same at 0.92, but increasing the general fund levy from what we proposed and decreasing the special building fund. And then we also gave you an option B, which increased the general fund and then decreased the special building fund, the QC Puff fund a little bit, keeping the levy the same as it was this year, but decreasing the special building fund, the QC Puff. So what we did was say that the property taxes for the general fund are going to be at the same levy as last year, but decrease the special building fund, the QC Puff, a little bit. Overall, then knowing that we're going to be right close in line to where the general fund and the overall levy will be the same as it was last year, just shifting those numbers between the two funds. Now, I do want to mention one thing. So we're always very cognizant of the joint public hearing, along with all the other hearings that we have to deal with. And the board going into August will have at least 3 hearings. And that could be more depending upon the direction that the board takes, but you do have to have at least 3 hearings. But in the process, this is the number that Dr. Rhodes and I always look at, because we want to keep ourselves under that joint public hearing. And so with that, I've attached the joint public hearing document. Now, along with certified valuations coming in on August 20th, at that point in time, we'll also know the real growth percentages. This is using last year's data. So at this point in time, all you can say is that, all right, last year, based upon their data, the growth, allowable growth percentage on total non-bond property tax will be 5.5%. So we try to keep ourselves under the 31,958,000 for both the general fund and the special building fund. So that's all we're trying to do at this point in time. So anyway, with that, those are the options based upon the conversation that we had at the board meeting and what we could propose to the board. With that, I don't believe I missed anything, Dr. Rhodes?
Nope.
Okay, with that, I'll turn it over for board discussion at this point.
Before we dive into our discussion, I just wanted to clarify a couple things just so everyone knows what we're looking at, Stuart, if you don't mind. When we look down at the bottom at the breakdown of the levies, and we see general fund, special building fund, QC Puff, and the subtotal, and then we see that separate QC Puff line that's deducted off of there. Can you explain to us what it is we're looking at there?
Yeah, because the QC Puff has bonds in there, so those become non-levy lid issues, and so we take that off. So when we're looking at, for example, the growth, the joint public hearing calculation, they take the QC Puff levy off because they know that you're still paying off bonds, and we know that we have some bond payments going through in the QC Puff. So in that, the state has said you have to take your bond calculation off of that for calculation of where your levy would be within that, we'll just say the $1.05 at this point in time, but in the process where that lid will be, and then how will that correlate to the joint public hearing as well as anything else.
Yeah, so bond levies and the QC Puff are exempt from the levy lid. And so if you remember in the past, we've had total levies of $1.06 or $1.07, but by the time you take out the QC Puff, or when we were paying off the bond at Lake or the high school, you subtract those, and then what is left qualifies for the levy lid of $1.05, which is in statute.
So the bold number there at the bottom applies when we're looking at what counts against us essentially in that allowable growth percentage. But if we're really looking at an honest number of what we're levying our community, it would be that subtotal amount.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody
No.
knows what numbers mean what before we dive too far into conversation. I do have a few questions, but I want to open it up to the rest of the board first to hear if anybody has questions for Stuart, any thoughts on what's being proposed here.
We talked about trying to move money into the cash reserve. So in option A, where are we going with that? Because it was about 400,000 from the sale of Osgood, right?
Right.
So is that still part of the plan in option A, or is it just option
Yeah,
B?
I think option A, if you remember from the budget workshop, and please, Dr. McDonald and Mr. Simpson jump in, but one of the I don't know if it's a worry, but I would just say that middle proposition is tight as it relates to staffing. So if you remember, we talked about August, all of a sudden you have new enrollees coming in at the elementary level, and there may be a need to hire an elementary teacher. That middle column is really tight as it relates to personnel. So to answer your question, Justin, that option A, that's about $340,000 additional in that general fund. One of two things can happen with that. It allows us probably 2 staff members, or if we don't have to hire anybody, then that just goes into cash reserve. So potentially, you'd be looking at maybe an additional $300,000 to $350,000 of cash reserve with option A. And option, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, option B, when we looked at option B, we did reduce special building fund a little bit, and obviously the QC PUF as well. That one has both those items in the general fund. It has additional staffing if we need it, and it has cash reserve up to the tune of the $500,000 that we did for the 24-25 school year.
So a couple of clarifying questions, kind of piggybacking off of Justin's question and your response, Dr. Rhodes. That $340,000 that the special building fund was reduced by and put into general fund, where did we get that number? Because I know our net revenue from Osgood was more in the $418,000. So there's like a $75,000 difference there. Is there a way we can adjust that to better match the number from the Osgood sale?
The only reason that we put $340,000 into there is that 1 penny generates from the valuation about $340,000. So we just said we're reducing a penny off, therefore it correlates to that. It had no bearing on the Osgood sale. It just says we acknowledge the sale in the building fund, but as we look at property tax valuation or property tax requests, we were just adjusting according to the 1 cent. The two were not joined together.
So you're saying the total from the Osgood sale was 418?
413.
413.
Yeah,
Some change.
around in that.
So these numbers don't have that in there at all?
No, this
So
is
that's
not.
just extra that we
Yeah,
can put,
413,
we could totally
642.
put into the cash reserve.
Well, the 413 will be in the cash reserve of the building fund for whatever the board wants to do in the future at this point in time.
So the Osgood sale goes into special building fund, so the thought was to decrease the special building fund levied amount in anticipation of that additional revenue there, so that then that additional revenue could be then put into the general fund essentially with the same net levy. But in my opinion, I would like to see that number match a little bit closer if we can. That would be my first thought on that. My second thought on that is I do think the board's wishes were for that. At least my wishes, I guess I don't want to speak for the rest of the board. My wish for that would be to have some assurance that that money is going to go into cash reserves, that would be plan A for that money. Because my thought with that is if we do have to hire a staff partway through the year, could you not use cash reserves to do so? Mm-hmm. So I would rather cash reserves be plan A, hiring staff be plan B if needed, rather than have it earmarked to hire staff and then hope that we have it left over to put into cash reserves. That would be my
I do
thought.
want to clarify something in regards to the building fund. So you're putting money in there, which is, I understand that, but you still have a few expenditures from Eisenhower just because of product delivery and everything else that will be coming out of the building fund. So I want you to be conscientious that you know that this is not fully going to go into reserves for the Osgood sale. You're going to have some dollars coming back out for Eisenhower items.
So we don't have enough for the Eisenhower items?
Well,
except
I'm
now we
hoping
sold
that, I'm
Osgood
hoping by
Depot?
the end of the year with some of the property taxes coming in during the summer that we have enough in there to cover it. But I'm just saying, don't just know that it's just going to go into reserve because we don't know what those bills are going to come in at on a few items. For example, we had to replace the electrical panel at Osgood, or at Eisenhower, and in that took until this summer to get done, and they're right now completing that process, and they will bill us accordingly with the bid they did. But I'm just saying that bid will come in, and then we have those costs to account for.
But I'm saying, we have that, we've hired for that job and we didn't have the money for it?
No, we were anticipating the money, but I'm just saying, right now, it's the remaining budget or the remaining property taxes that we are collected are gonna go into reserves to pay for those products. But I'm just saying, don't always bank on having that money there because something may come up that you may have to pay for.
Yeah, we have
That's
several months of revenue
Right.
left for tax receipts. And if you remember the report that we shared, I don't know, it's probably been several months ago, that we haven't been receiving the total allocation of tax receipts over the past 11 years, I think, was a report that Dr. McDonald had put together. So it was budgeted appropriately. We just have to wait for those receipts to get in, and we have July and August left. Well,
Right.
June, July, and August left, so, for those tax receipts.
One item that I wanted to maybe revisit, in just looking at all of these as we were going through the student and staff handbook and also having my own child who's at the high school, I wanted to just throw out there maybe if there is an opportunity for us to do something with the security at the high school without having to raise people's taxes, that would be something that I could see some value in as well. So I'm not exactly sure which of these proposed plans would fit something like that, and I know it still may be a year or two before we're able to do something like that, but I don't want to lose sight of that's something that we've had kind of on the radar for a while, and I think it needs to continue to be a topic of discussion as far as the budget goes.
But I think one of the things that we need to do, because we have till August, is to continue to discuss this, look at these things. And I think, as we have other, because we're going to have discussions, whether it's a board meeting or whether it's these, until then, that if we have questions, then we can bring those up each time, because the meeting will be on August 28th on that Thursday. So I think that gives us roughly 2 months. And I know we had a lot of good discussions and comments at our workshop. But I think we need to really delve into this a little more. Personally, I did look at all this week, but I think the more that we do that and come up with ideas like what Joanne just talked about are things that we can think about and discuss as we go along.
I agree with you, Skip. I feel that we need to have more discussions on this before the end of August.
Yeah, I think that, this is good to see comparison options, but I think the document that was provided to us in the workshop was so helpful for us to see, in this proposed option, this is kind of the breakdown of where that money would go, and this is maybe somewhere where where we're pulling back a little bit of spending and saving, and this is somewhere where we're kind of prioritizing. So I do think that maybe it would be helpful if board members do have some ideas or suggestions or requests, and then to maybe see another kind of big compiled document of what that breakdown would really look like. You know, if the board says we want to do option A, or we want to do option A with this small change, what does that look like when we really break down the numbers?
And
'Cause that
just-
allows us to see if we have problems somewhere where it's like, man, this isn't going to be funded very well, we need to address that. Or kind of your concerns, Joanne, with making sure we do have money to address security and safety issues, I think would be important to see.
I would suggest get recommendations to Dr. McDonald and I, and we'll just continually get you information. We'll email that out to you so you have it. You know, that's just say, you know, to Emily's point, the difference is about $75,000 if you look at option A. That number could be, if you would add in the 413,000, that number would be about 345,000 instead of the 419. So you could potentially shift if that's where you wanted to be, and we're still collecting the 757,000 that we've done for a long time in the special building fund with the sale of Osgood. You could potentially add about 75,000 to the general fund tax levy that would add again to the cash reserve. So. And I think to the point of prioritizing either cash reserve or staffing, that would be solely on student enrollment.
Sure.
You know, that would be on our needs. So, you know, we're not going to add staff just to add staff. Actually, we're in a really good place for staffing. But, you know, you get 2 or 3 kids in one elementary ward and it bumps up those numbers to maybe 33 in a section. We're not going to want to have a second grade class of 33 kids. And so that, I mean, it would certainly be cash reserve unless the student need is driving that.
Can we?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I just wrote this down, excuse me. You're talking about getting to 25% of your budget with cash reserve, which I think is very wise. My question would be is, you know, have you had a discussion in regard to how you might get there? And I say that because when you're talking about $300,000 on $300,000 increments, and 25% of your budget in cash reserve is going to be closer to that $14 million mark. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, from what I've seen, we're typically about $4 million right now within that cash reserve.
In the general fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, that would just be a question I would pose to the board is how do you perceive to get to that point or the next few years incrementally? And then when you're bringing up safety concerns, I guess as I would look at that, I would think that we wouldn't want to take away from your QC PUF or your special building fund because you know, if you're talking high school, and I've been in high school, and I think, you know, you're talking about entrance, some of those types of things, you know, facility costs have gone up detrimentally in regards to what that may look like as far as bringing an engineer and, you know, getting that the way that you want it to look as far as that high school building looks and to keep it the way, you know, as nice and as pristine as it is inside and out. You know, you're just looking at some dollars there. So I would just caution you on that and would open that up for a discussion as to see, you know, what your feelings would be and what the budget might look like to get you to that point. And not just this next year, but over incrementally over the next few
Agreed.
years.
Yeah, we have talked about that, and
Okay.
I have always been concerned about our reserves. For the last several years, and I brought that up, that, you know, a lot of school districts have gotten into deep trouble because they have not had enough in their reserves. So your points are very valid, very valid.
And I'm more than happy to give you some information to still work with Stuart while he's still here, and I know I hope he's gonna give me some contact information.
We know where he is.
But certainly, for further discussion.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's definitely important to keep in mind. I think it's not going to be a concrete, this is how we do it, because there's going to be so many things going into play. So, I mean, part of building your cash reserves is decreasing your spending on things that you don't need to be spending on necessarily, because that leaves more money left over to put in cash reserves. I think another way that we get to that percentage is simply by not increasing our budget so much year to year, because you're chasing an endless goal. If you're trying to get your cash reserves to a percentage of this number that you're continually raising every year, even if your cash reserves are increasing every year, you're not increasing your percentage of your total budget that you have in cash reserves. So I think those things go into play in addition to determining where we're getting money from to put into cash reserves. So I kind of see it as a multifaceted approach, but I think that that's really good insight for us to do some thinking on. And I think we all agree it's important to build our cash reserves, but maybe the method of getting there is what we need to decide as a board. I had a question on that QC Puff from the 2025 or 2024-2025 year to then option A and proposed. There's a pretty significant increase there, and then option B sees kind of more of a moderate increase. Could you explain to us why we see an increase there, what that might entail, just so we kind of better understand?
In that one, obviously we have the bonds to be paid off in the QC Puff, and I was trying to lay it out, and then maybe at least account for a little bit more of the bond payment, so that in the next couple of years that number can decrease accordingly. Now, going along with what Joanne said, the board can take into account too that QC Puff can now be used a little bit for safety and security too. So, with that, depending upon where reserves fall in the QC Puff, some of those funds can then turn around in the future here, be used for safety and security also.
So in increasing that number, we're essentially speeding up the process of how quickly we pay off that bond.
We're trying to make sure that, I just want to make sure that the board can have the funds there to pay off the bonds and then ensure any safety and security issues that come up too.
And what bonds are we paying?
We installed, actually we're here at one of the buildings, Cody Elementary. We did Cody Elementary, Washington, and Buffalo at one point in time, and issued bonds through the QC Puff. And then we actually did another set of bonds for Lincoln Elementary and updated that one. And then in the process with refinancing and reducing the interest, we were able to consolidate and put a lot of the payments up front and then gradually reduce those down.
So if we were to leave that QC Puff amount to what we see in 2024, 2025, or maybe the option that we see in option B, does that have a negative consequence down the road in paying off that bonds, or does it just prolong the process of it?
All you're doing is putting a little bit money in reserve so that you can address possible safety and security or bond payments, but no matter what, you'll just have one more bond payment after this year, and then in the process, can everything be put to bed, and then just address safety and security, whether it's in the general fund or the QC Puff.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that
So
make
if we
sense?
decide as a board that we want to prioritize,
Right.
say for instance,
Right.
security in the high school, that really could be accounted for in any of these levies. It could be in special building, it could potentially be QC Puff.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think I would just like to say my only concern with increasing what we see in QC Puff is the fact that that is deducted off of there when we're looking at some of the other figures. It kind of is a little bit deceiving when you are looking at levy amounts. And my other concern for that would be that if we're kind of building up that QC Puff for right now, and then that bond is paid off and that levy goes away, we've kind of set the floor at that point for we're going to have roughly this amount of levy. But in my brain, once that goes away, we should see a decrease in levy. And so I just want to be very clear that, in my opinion, if we're building QC Puff for the intent of this purpose, I don't think that should set precedence or a floor of where we see our total levy amount, you know, a few years down the road once QC Puff is gone off of there. To me, that levy amount should potentially drop at that point, not stay the same. Do we have any other thoughts or questions on budget this evening? Does the board have any requests in what they would like to see maybe in our next budget discussion of any potential changes to any of these options? Any thoughts?
Again, I think we have to think about that. And as Dr. Rhodes said, either send him a question or Dr. McDonald. I think that will suffice.
Yeah, we can run scenarios very quickly and get that emailed right back out.
Okay. So I think I would, if there's not further discussion, I would just probably leave each of the board members with that challenge of, as you kind of process the information tonight, if you think of additional questions, I do want to make sure that those questions at some point, even if you do send an email, that we bring them before the whole board, because probably if you have the question, there might be other board members that have that question or didn't know they had the question.
Like, I'd like to hear what your question is.
Yeah.
I will
This
share
stuff
the
is so
question.
confusing.
I will
Okay.
blind copy all board members so
Okay.
you know what the
Perfect.
question
I think that would be
and
really
answer
helpful.
is. Yep.
Because I think we learn a lot from each other in those conversations, so I want to make sure we're facilitating that. And then I think that when we come back together next time to discuss budget, and you guys, if you've received questions and have replies, then we'll kind of summarize that and we'll bring, you know, if there is a new option to present at that point, or we just want to talk through questions and answers, as a board, we can kind of decide. The beauty of it is we have started this process early enough, and to your point, Skip, we've still got a couple of months to work out details and questions, so I think we're probably close to feeling like, you know, we're going to be comfortable with budget, so. All right. Nothing more on budget? All right.
Today.
Yes, we should clarify that.
Questions to Stuart, whether he's leaving or not. We
Yeah.
usually don't.
All right. Next, we will dive into our parent and student handbook. So, Mrs. Busher, you are welcome to kind of walk us through anything. And then I do know that there are some board questions and comments on this, so we'll let you start us off, and then we'll.
You want me to blow it up here, Brandy?
It's 96 pages, so I'm not going to.
I was gonna say, do we need to like take a restroom break first, or?
I do want to give a little context. When I took over the handbook, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we did not own that document. It was owned through Printing, and they had the document, the software it was on did not match up with us. So we have always kind of had to farm that out. Like, I would send them the information, and they would edit it for us, and that's kind of what the old handbook was. And it was really kind of a potpourri of old policies, things that people had said, hey, we should put this in there, this and that. So this year, we decided to just completely gut that and create our own document. So number one, we're not paying anyone to do the document ourselves. But number two, it's KSB's recommended handbook. So we just went through this page by page and made sure that I sent a lot of emails to our principals, just, hey, it's really essentially the same verbiage, but this says it a little bit differently. Normally we approve handbooks in July, so you may have seen there's a few that might not exactly add up with the policy, but that's because we haven't got to reviewing that policy yet. So the attendance one is a tad bit different than what our policy says. That's just because we're reviewing this a little bit early. So if you saw that in a few places, it's we'll get there with policy to make sure it aligns. But yeah, so I guess I'll open it up for questions from you guys.
Maybe before, any significant changes that due to the legislature and
Yeah, so some of the changes, well, obviously our cell phone policy is in there, and then kind of how we're going to handle infractions for cell phone is in its own category in there. Dress code, there was some changes to that, which is reflected in there. We did change a little bit with our attendance policy. We wanted to, so last year we had said that if you provide a medical note within 5 days of your absence, it would be an exempt absence. So we made sure that was reflected in there. And then we also put in college visits that kids are allowed up to, well, we did how many days that you could do for a college visit. So, and that would be an exempt absence as well for juniors or seniors. So a few tweaks there. Title IX. The policy you guys are reviewing tonight, parent involvement, that's in there. I can't think of anything really major besides, I mean, cell phone is probably the biggest one that would be a difference. We added some things that we probably didn't have before. That was per some of our principals, you know, during the year would call me and say, hey, I noticed this wasn't in there, this would be really helpful. So we just, all year, I keep a document where I take notes, so we make sure we get that in there at the end of the year.
Okay, do we have any questions first for Randy and anything we want her to clarify? Okay. I know that there were, Justin, you had made a couple of suggestions that I thought were really good.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it was. So I was looking at like the dress code. I don't know what page that's on. Forgive me. I would scan all 92 pages here, but I'm going to get lost. To me, it just seemed so vague. It was up to the discretion of you versus me. That I think that leaves a little bit of a gray area for our students. That what is appropriate to one teacher or to a building administrator is going to be totally different for somebody else. And I don't know if there's any way for us to clean up some of that just so it's consistent at every school. I think you talked about the policy stuff. I was looking at, I think, the complaint policy or the parent complaint policy, just making sure that lines up with just some of the changes we made.
Yeah, that's a good catch because we did change some verbiage in that policy.
There's the firearms section, and I don't know if it's worth, there's talk about weapons as a whole, but there's some stuff in there about if you have something that looks like a weapon or something, like there's not a explicit weapons ban from the schools. There's a firearm policy, but I know with the concealed carry weapon stuff in the state, you can now carry brass knuckles in your pockets and you're fine, because it's just a weapon. But we don't have anything that explicitly bans weapons from being brought to school. Knives, I didn't see anything in there, the brass knuckles, anything like that. We just had a very specific firearm policy. So I'd like to see us, anything that would be, whether it's knife, pocket knife, all those things, be banned from the school.
Federally, those are banned, is that right?
So in the student discipline section, there is a section that says weapons and anything that could be used or perceived as a weapon. And we can go through that and be a little bit more detailed. You know, KSB, and I think it's probably a 50-50 bag if we talk to our principals on how they feel. They like it vague because they don't want people to feel like, for example, a pocket knife. You have a little kid who's in Boy Scouts and they accidentally have it in their pocket and they go to the office and say, whoops, I forgot I had this, I want to give it to you. You know, we don't want to feel as though that kid is going to get 10 days out versus if a kid brings it and, you know, is doing something that's not welcomed in our school. So KSB has always said we want it to be vague so you can interpret it based on the situation and not feel like you have to be super rigid with every single thing. But I do understand in some of those situations where then that leaves you in a place with parents where you're kind of
Yeah, that vagueness with parents is always going to be fun for you guys to deal with ultimately. And the more we can avoid that, I think it benefits everybody.
Yeah.
And I saw the deal in there about the weapons, and I just don't know if it's worth just with the firearms, any weapons all at once, just kind of take it off the board. That way it's not, well, it didn't say in here, I specifically couldn't have a long sword in my pocket today, you know, whatever it is, these, I don't understand, Chinese throwing stars that are now making a comeback. So I think, is there something else? I have to look at what I,
You had mentioned to me just that it would be good to add the mission statement to
Yeah. Oh,
both
yeah.
of our handbooks, which I think would be
Oh.
a great
Good
addition
idea.
somewhere at the beginning. I think in the one, maybe the staff or the student, one of them has a page already that has pictures, and my thought was you wouldn't have to mess up all your page numbering if you just added it to that page.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I know that could be a logistical nightmare,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I thought that was a really good idea.
I think that is a good idea, and like I said, our previous one had almost too much, that it was already on our webpage, so it felt redundant, but I think
Right.
that would be a really good thing
Mhm.
to put in there. So, yeah, we can add that. And we can change the table of contents, like
It's not a huge
now that
pain.
Now that we have control of it, it's much easier to make edits and change it, so. And I know Joanne had mentioned grouping it better into categories. KSB had it alphabetically. I kind of went back and forth with that, if we should try to put it in categories or do alphabetically. I think either way, you're gonna have some stuff split up throughout the handbook. Table of contents is a little bit easier if it's alphabetically, just for people to be able to quickly go find where's this, but that's something we can always rearrange too, if we feel like that's maybe more helpful for parents, so.
Yeah, I think maybe with the thought of table of contents and kind of to Justin's point, like with the weapons, it might be nice. I think when it comes to the student disciplinary piece of it, leaving it to some discretion is good because like you said, there's a scenario, a lot of it is going to be intent when you bring something. But I do think maybe it would be nice to have a section that is called weapons or something that's really easy to find that lists like these things. This is not an all-inclusive list, but these things are not allowed and lists the main ones that we could think of so that if somebody's like, well, you didn't list this, it's like, well, but it says right here, these are not allowed.
Right.
And then as far as the disciplinary piece of it, that kind of can be open to a little bit of discretion, I think might be kind of a good compromise on those.
I think we could work with our principals to kind of come up with some things they've seen over the years. And we're very lucky, our school resource officers are also very good about saying this absolutely constitutes a weapon. So the few times maybe there has been a little bit of questioning, they've been really helpful in making sure that they can help us with that too. But I don't have a problem at all with putting some specific, being a little bit more specific with what is a weapon and
Okay.
that narrative for sure.
I had a couple of suggestions, Brandy, that I will probably just email you that were just minor formatting things that I noticed going through. I don't think as a board we need to like have discussion about those things necessarily. But there were just a couple of things that I had questions about that were more content related. On page 16, it kind of talks about coats and boots. And it's kind of really vague as far as like the teachers will decide. I think from a parent perspective, I'm always checking the weather. Like when I send my child somewhere, like what does he need to wear today? Does he need a coat? Does he need a jacket? I think it might be helpful to have something that's a little more specific, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but if it's, you know, if it's below X temperature, coats are required on the playground, or if it's these weather conditions, because I could see there being some confusion. You know, if I am like, my kid is really warm-blooded and he doesn't need a coat if it's 40 degrees outside, I mean, whatever the number is, but the teacher's like, no, you need a coat, and I haven't sent one, then I think just having something kind of clear might be good. I don't know what's been done in the past, if this is a change from the past, or if this is what it's always been.
We've always had, like, teachers really want something in there about boots because they don't want kids wearing boots around the building and having them on. So we've always had that, like, you need to take your boots off. We don't want kids getting wet tennis shoes on the playground. So we did have a section about coats and boots. I think maybe the staff will decide if the coats requirement might be new. That might be some different language. But yeah, we always had it kind of, the boots, sometimes it's a big deal in elementary. So But I can email the principals too and see if they have any input that they think would be helpful on that. Sometimes it's helpful just to put what the temperature is for outside recess, and then that's just kind of, this is what this temperature, that means you go outside.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And even thinking about that from a teacher perspective, sometimes it's like you're caught in limbo of like, well, what way should I go? And if you just know, like, oh, check the weather, it's 52 degrees outside. Okay, now we know. I think that anytime we can like just make things clear, that's a good idea. So that was one thought I had. And then I just noticed, and this probably is in our policy that we might want to look at also, but on page 16 where it talks about communicable diseases, we list you specifically, and we've kind of been cleaning up policies as we go through to list a position rather than a name, so that if there is any sort of change, for instance, the policy we just changed that had Stuart's name in it, that it's tied more to a role and a contact rather than a name. It's a minor change, but I just thought while we're kind of making those changes, it might make sense to do that one as well. Not that we want you to go anywhere, I just want to be clear. We hope it stays your name, Brittany, but just so that we're kind of set up for that. Does anybody else have any thoughts on the parent-student handbook or questions?
I did send an email earlier in the week, and Brandy was able to. Most of the things that I had were just kind of technical cleanup kinds of things. She did answer some questions for me. One question I had was about the makeup rules. And I just know, having students go through the school district, that for sports and those types of things, that usually they're not doing the work ahead of time. Usually it's an after. And so Brandy was able to clarify some of that for me. And then there was also one with the doctor's notes, because I noticed in one place it said 4 days, and then there was another place that said 5 days. And she clarified that after 4 days of being sick, that they would like to have parents take their kids to be seen by a doctor. And then when the child returns to school, the absences can only be exempt if they get a note within 5 days of their return. I do know that the schools have, especially this year where they've really been enforcing that rule, that they've been a little bit lenient, and which I also know, even though you don't want a bunch of notes coming in at the end of the year or at the end of the semester or something, that is appreciated, because sometimes parents have busy lives and they do get them there a little bit beyond the 5 days. So I appreciate that. And then just some clarity on the Chromebooks, and because there was a spot where it talks about device use permission from the driver of the school vehicle. And so clarifying the cell phones versus Chromebooks. And yeah, so, but I really appreciate the prompt response, and she got pretty much all of my questions and issues addressed.
And the one about, like, if you're absent and participating in activities, I'm still working with Mr. McCoy and Mr. Slicky on that one. So the thing I love about this handbook is at the end it does say that it might change throughout the course of the year, because policies change, and sometimes the way we go about doing business changes. So that section, I think it's, again, vague enough that we're probably fine even if it does change a little. I think where that is going to be most important is in the activities code of conduct. So the kids participating in activities really understand that more so than in this handbook, but we'll make sure we get that hammered out as well. So, and if any of you guys have a question about anything, just shoot me an email. If there's something in there you're just not really sure why it's in there or it doesn't make sense, I'm happy to problem solve, and always appreciate the input if we need to do something differently, because having, especially parent eyes, or, you know, like that's helpful for me to see that there's something in there that maybe doesn't go about the way we're doing business either, so then we can make sure it reflects how we do things.
I do have one question. This was in a later email. The part about the weather, could we have something that just lets parents know that they could get a phone call as early as 6 a.m.? I thought that was something in the staff handbook that was really nice. I mean, I know that it could come the night before, or it could come, you know, by 7, but in the staff handbook, it clarified that you could be getting a phone call as early as 6 a.m. just as we run through all of the numbers that we have to get through on our system. And it may be nice to let parents know that there are some circumstances that the call could come in the night before too. So,
Yes, yeah, we can make some changes.
but other than that, I thought it was really good.
That's a good thought, because there really are a lot of people now with your cell phones that turn off phone calls and notifications and things between certain hours. So if you know that you're potentially going to get a 6 o'clock phone call and you're paying attention, you might choose to turn that off on your phone that night, or set it to where it turns off earlier, or that kind of thing. So that's a good thought. So this may be an unpopular opinion, and I am going to acknowledge that now, but I have a bit of a hard time making a recommendation that we take action on this at this next meeting, just
I totally agree
because
with you.
we just received this on Monday, and that's not like me upset at you. I just want to acknowledge that
It's just a
the
lot to
board
go
is
through.
volunteers, and this is an exceptionally busy time of year. And this is a 90-some page document that we've had since Monday, late afternoon. So I would be lying if I told you that I felt like I had done a very thorough review of it, where I was able to truly read through every page, because that's just, I don't know that that's a reasonable expectation in that amount of time. So I know that we want to get this in the hands of parents and staff when we get to the staff handbook as well, as soon as we can. But there is a part of me that kind of wants to allow a little bit more time for board members to look through it, especially since we are making some really big formatting changes about making it internal, and I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with that.
But don't you think that this needs to be ratified by us, voted on before school starts? I would say yes.
And let me put a proposal out there?
Sure.
So our regular board meeting is still a little bit away. I'm not sure for 1 or 2 weeks. I haven't really looked at my calendar. I'm kind of on a day-to-day basis.
2 weeks from
right now.
Monday.
Okay.
Because Monday's the 30th.
So we have a little bit of time. If there is no one who has any significant concerns by the time our board meeting rolls around, would you entertain us potentially voting on it then? I mean, that should give, if we have the next 2 weeks especially, that should give everybody plenty of time.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks' time is very appropriate to expect somebody to digest a document of this size. Absolutely. So I'm totally fine with having it on the agenda as an option. I just don't want anybody to be making plans surrounding the disbursement of this with the assumption that it is passed in that meeting, because in my opinion, if somebody does have more time to review this between now and then and comes in with a lot of questions or potential changes, we're not going to be making those on the fly during the meeting. We're going to want to allow you time to do that. And so there is potential that it could need to be bumped to the next meeting.
Well, and is there any way we could maybe do the employee handbook at the meeting and the parent-student one at the following meeting? I looked at both of them. We have a 96 page, and I think the other one's 73, plus we had budget stuff and these other policies. And I mean, I know half of us are retired, but I'm not, and I work 80 hours a week. So it's a lot, and I've got 10 kids running around. I am not reading a parent handbook. And I did go through it, and I skimmed it. But I wasn't able to go in and send an email with a ton of updates because I didn't have the time.
I think it's important enough from a timing standpoint that my recommendation would be, if you're not ready to pass it on the 14th, that we put it on the committee of the whole at the end of July. You know, we say that these are non-voting meetings, but frankly, you're taking votes throughout the committee of the whole agenda.
Right. Sometimes
You know,
there's a
you're
need.
approving publication and agendas and all those things, so,
But
but I don't know that date off the
Again,
top
I'll
of
go
my
back, I
head.
think these have to be voted on before we have the start of.
Yeah,
I understand that.
Yeah.
but I think we could put it on the committee of the whole if you're not ready to have it as an action item on the July meeting. I think I would just encourage. I think when it comes to the handbooks, and I'll take a little bit of responsibility on communication. Remember, these are just updated of the handbooks that are already online.
Right.
And so sometimes I probably make assumptions I shouldn't, that, you know, for instance, employee was all policy-based changes based on what happened in the legislature, so not a ton of changes with the employee handbook from what we've had online. So I should have reminded you that you could have always looked at the handbooks that we've already had, and then we'd just go over the changes that we had, because the changes are formatting more than anything on this handbook versus what we had with pro printing.
Yes.
And then the other significant changes are based on laws and the legislature and those things. So, but yeah, I think you can give yourselves a little time with that committee of the whole meeting at the end of July as well.
If we can't do it on
What's
It's on the
the
31st.
on the 31st?
Yeah. If we can't do it on the 14th, but that's still roughly 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And then our board meeting in August is just right before school starts, is that correct?
The board meeting in August is the 11th, yes.
And school starts on the 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
But teachers will have started.
Yeah, I think that's good, even if we could say digest one, definitely for the 14th, and you can do the other later, but I know I just got that on the 23rd during lunch, and I was like, I can't read this fast enough.
Yeah, I just want to be careful about having reasonable expectations of board members and be respectful of that. And if everybody feels comfortable with it at our next meeting, by all means, someone make the motion to approve it. But I just want to be clear that if
Well,
there's
it'd have to be
anybody
on the
that
agenda.
feels like they've got
Yeah.
a lot of questions
I think
or
it should be on
something.
the agenda.
Yes, yes. So I will leave that to whoever chooses to make that motion, whether it would be to table it, to take action, whatever that may be. I wanted to be clear that those are my thoughts on it. And I think in the future, us having it in hand a little bit sooner, but I also think, and this kind of falls on me, I think that next time we're doing policy review, I think we really need to make sure that we get to the 4,000 specifically before we do staff handbook, because that is so heavily, I mean, it pretty much dictates your staff handbook, what's in the 4,000. So for us to approve a handbook and then the following month potentially be changing policies is, I think we can improve that process in the future.
Maybe one thing that could happen too is that we could be given a red line version. I don't know how complex that would be, but just
So we can quickly
a
see the
thought so that
changes.
you're able to scan more quickly and see the immediate changes.
That's a great idea.
Just something to consider.
Yeah.
If it's a lot of work or it's going to take someone a lot of time to provide something like that.
I think once we have our format, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't have worked with the student handbook for sure. We wouldn't have been able to do that because you couldn't compare it to the format of the old one, you know, because it's in a different order.
We also don't get KSB's recommended changes sometimes until the 15th of June.
Yeah.
So then I have a 100-page document, I have to go through theirs and ours and align it. So we're always at the mercy of KSB and what they send us for updated recommended changes, so.
And some of what they're at the mercy of is the legislature.
Yeah, right.
Well, next year it's a short session. So
That'll
it's
make a
60
big
days,
difference.
and that'll make a big
Fingers
difference. Big difference.
Well, and next year, if the formatting's different, and you could do like a red line to send
Yeah.
us. That would be quicker for us too.
That is a great suggestion, because that
Yeah,
would be so
that's
helpful. Because when you
fantastic.
don't know what the changes are, you really feel like you need to read all 96
Yeah, that's kind of where I was at,
pages.
because I
That's
thought there
a
was a lot
lot.
of changes.
Well, it's kind of like the policies we've had. We haven't had them highlighted in yellow,
Yes.
so we can go right to what the changes, if there are any.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, and I understand why that can't happen with
Yeah.
this, but in the next years, I think that would really be beneficial.
Hey, this may not be appropriate, but I was so glad I got to read it now, because now when I get it as a parent, I can just sign it. I won't have to worry about rereading the handbook. Already done.
Already done.
Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
We appreciate it, Brandy. Okay, employee handbook, Mr. Mills, what do you got for us?
Really no significant changes other than, the complaint policy entitled. So I take the policies and put them, the updated one into the handbook. The big thing with the staff handbook, obviously that's policy 4034 of board policy. And I think one of the biggest things, the staff handbook is an extension of these policies and has the force and effect of board policy when approved by the Board of Education. So that process was given to me. No real significant changes. There was a couple updates with page 4. We had 3 district preschools. Obviously, we only have 1 preschool. So the updates were going through. The process is similar. We send this out to all of McKinley. So finance looks at it, payroll looks at it, P&L, all the departments look at their pieces and then bring back the changes. Most all of the updates were simple ones of name changes. Obviously, we missed that we had 2 presidents on the board. Thank you, Joanne. Misspelling on that thing. The other one was an IRS change on page 17, where we adjusted the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was a new change that came by from the IRS. Let's see, what else? There were some other things where I just cleaned up, like on page 45, tutoring, it just didn't quite fit, so that got cleaned up. And then obviously the big one was just the complaint procedure to make sure that matches our policy. So the staff handbook, we obviously use, as parents and students use the student handbook. We start in with this with our new teachers. So I already have my professional development developed with slides with all of the policies that we want to make sure our new teachers see. And then I also pull out many things of the staff handbook for our new teacher training. And Brandy does the same thing with some of those policies as well. So this one for sure is one that we use a lot. It's online. It has lawyer approved and administrator approved. There's a lot of experience looking at these things. And again, all of you except maybe Justin probably hadn't seen this since you're new to the board that we go through each year. So all of our changes just come from updates, either name changes or anything that's in policy that needs to be updated. Joanne had a couple things, I addressed those.
Did you make a decision on the COVID statement?
I wrote an email back that one was given to us by attorneys, and it can be removed. That's up to Dr. Rhodes and the board.
Yeah, I don't mind the statement. I just feel that we're a few years out from COVID, and so I just didn't know if the COVID language still needed to be on there, but.
I would say we remove the statement, because I think that's a pain point in our community that I don't think we should remind people of, quite frankly, because there were a lot of people that were not very happy during that time period. And in my opinion, I mean, it's over and it's no longer main focus.
I know that there is made mention in another place near the beginning that, changes will be communicated to staff and updated online as they happen, and so.
Yeah, that can be removed. We added that, and Joanne brought it up, so whatever you guys decide now. That's it.
And then you also put in a part about the cell phones and cell phone policy. That was another question I had as far as teachers, I'm just, now that kids won't have phones, I'm worried about teachers just handing their phone to a kid, so.
And we're going to hit that one hard. We have it in our handbook.
I think that was on page 31, was the cell phones, 33, 30, yeah. And then you responded with page 30.
So yeah, so it's under school procedures, the use of phones. So we will, what I'm planning to do, obviously my new teachers, we're going to hit this hard with them, and then this is going to be a major reminder to all of our staff. Because it tells us, I'll just read it to you real quick. Employees are not to use personal cell phones for any non-school purpose during duty time. Telephone shall not be made during duty time except in the event of emergency. No personal long-distance calls on school telephones will be authorized except in emergencies. Employees are not to use cell phones, otherwise engage in distracted driving. So we have what we need here. We just need to reinforce this with our staff, with our obviously our new.
But I think to Joanne's point, she wanted some language in there about the student's use of the teacher's cell phone. Is that what you're saying? Which I think we could add that in as a step, no sharing of phones with students, personal cell phone with student or whatever the case, or unless emergency or something. We can put something in there.
I feel like it's really important that it's emphasized that if a student needs to communicate with their parent or guardian or whomever, that they need to go to the office and, or use, I know some of the classrooms, I think, have phones in them.
I think all of our classrooms have phones.
So just so long as those phones are the ones.
Yeah, we can put some language in on that.
Staff.
They need to use, and honestly, that kind of, I like using the language of students utilizing district communication devices, because I think that is a concern from parents that we've heard, and that kind of addresses that concern as well, so.
And then the final thing, and I guess this, Stuart, this is a little bit of a question for you. So there was some language in there about mileage reimbursement to employees, and so my question is similar to what I hope that we as board members are holding ourselves to, that we're not taking advantage of travel when we can travel with other people. Or, I mean, obviously if you're driving to Utah, I don't feel like that should be, I feel like that teachers should maybe be talked about district vehicles, rental cars, so that we're not reimbursing for excessive distances for travel.
If a staff member wants to attend something or go somewhere, they have to submit the request to the cabinet, and then the cabinet reviews that, and based upon that evaluation, if they're going with another person, or what other piece of vehicle can they use? Can they use a district vehicle? Why do they have to use their personal vehicle? And so that becomes a question at the cabinet level before we send it back out to the supervisor. So we do that.
And I did appreciate that there was language in there about if they're traveling partially for work and partially for personal reasons, what the reimbursement for that looks like and those types of things. So, and I liked that there was also specific language on the meal reimbursement piece, and so those are all just things that I know that we're trying to be more cognizant of, and so I'm glad that we're, and we should be modeling the behavior that we expect from our teachers as well. So.
There were a couple points in there that I feel like the language does not exactly align with policy. So I'm going to tell you what those couple of points are, and it's not a huge language change, but I just think that anytime we can be consistent in the language we use, we should be. So on page 7, the selection of staff, and then again on page 16, the reimbursement process, it kind of outlines who has approval and what those steps look like. And on page 7, I think the language says that hiring is done by the director of HR or something along those lines. But what our policy actually says is that the superintendent or designee makes a recommendation about hiring, and then final approval is made by the Board of Education. So I just think that language should probably be, I mean, it's saying the same thing because the director of HR is the designee by the superintendent. But I think that language should be consistent. And then similarly in that reimbursement process, we should match that language to our policy as well and acknowledge that there is actually a final step in that reimbursement process where the board has to approve the claims so that they don't think that they're just going to get a check immediately after this step. It has to go through a board meeting first and then payment is authorized. So those are just a couple cleanup things that I think need to match policy that are pretty subtle minor changes. And then I had a couple of spots where I had kind of some areas of concern that I just felt like we needed more clarification in our handbook. And that would be if we go to page 38, where it talks about relationships with students. The language that is used, let me go to it. Sorry, lots of pages. Let's see. So it's page 38 with the bottom of the page numbers, not page 38 in the document page numbers. Sorry, that was confusing. So it currently says employees are prohibited from engaging in any relationship that involves sexual contact or sexual penetration with a student while the student is a current student and for a minimum of 1 year after the date of the student's graduation. But I think there probably needs to be more inclusive language in there about the age of the student, because it really isn't a matter of whether the student is a student in our district or whether they've graduated. It's about the fact that it's illegal. So if we have somebody that has dropped out of the district at 16, they've been out of the district for for a year, they're now 17 and a half, it still should be our standards as a district that relationship would be inappropriate.
Let's reach out to Bobby from KSB and get a little because that's all KSB language. Yeah, and it's specific to the new grooming statute of a few years
I was
ago.
just going to say,
so I don't know.
That is covered in the state statute.
Yeah,
that was passed.
It's been 3 or 4 years,
Yeah,
or maybe longer.
That was specific and it's very well documented in there about how it should be followed and what it sets with.
I just have concerns because it's been a problem in our district.
I was going to say, I don't know that it would harm anything to be more detailed in it. I'd definitely call it.
I can reach out to KSB on that, because that came straight from them.
Yeah.
Okay. In that same section, my other little point of contention, and this is coming from a parent perspective, where it discusses giving a ride to a student or going on an outing. The language currently says that it requires parent or administrator approval, and I really think that should be and, not or. If I'm the parent of a 13-year-old and the teacher has administrative approval to drive my child somewhere, but I have not approved that, I am not going to be a very happy parent of a 13-year-old. I think that's on that same page.
39.
39.
Or yeah, 39 is where it carries over to. Mm-hmm. Yep, in the same section though.
Okay, that's,
Yeah, I really think we would not be doing our due diligence as a district if we didn't get a little bit more strict and specific on our language there. We shouldn't have to do that, but it feels like we do. And then on page 40, where it talks about relationships among staff, I feel like there probably needs to be some additional language in there about relationships between like superiors or administrators and staff that answers to them, or a different level and authority within the district. And there's not currently, unless I missed it, I'm not currently seeing language that includes that type of a thing. And I think that that's something that's really important for us to include in there.
Can I back you up to 30?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you talked about a student, or giving a student a ride, then the line below that also says taking a student on an outing. So I think both of those.
Both of those
Yep.
lines,
Yeah.
yes. They both use the same language.
Just for clarification.
I think that would be, yeah, because I mean, technically, you don't have to go in a car. You could walk on an outing or something. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions, changes, comments?
I do. I was looking at page 7, and where it says classified employees are at-will employees and may be terminated at any time by the school district. I do realize that this is an at-will state. I've always had a problem with that one line because to me, and I was a classified employee, to me, I always felt a little bit threatened because Lori Colburn does a great job with her custodians. She gives them a verbal warning, it's put in their file, then she gives them a written warning, and it's put in their file. Third strike and they're gone. And I really feel that should be for all of our classified staff, just the wording to be changed so that they know that this is the procedure. And that I feel like
The problem I have with that, just a little bit, is that they may not be being terminated because of disciplinary action. There could be other reasons that their position is being eliminated or, and so I feel like, I mean, it's one, and maybe that's something that needs to be taken to the attorneys too, I don't know, because we are an at-will state.
Correct.
And classified employees are at-will employees, and I don't feel like they should feel threatened by that. It's just
well,
kind of
Joanne,
the
you've
fact
not been a
of-
classified employee.
I actually have.
And so if they could just come in and say, you're terminated.
Yeah, it would stink. It would really stink.
Don't you think
that's
that
the-
if there's a problem with that employee?
But I'm, Cindy, what I'm saying is that not all terminations are because of disciplinary action.
I understand that.
That
think
makes
we'd be
sense, but I think
covered
that
in
we need
our-
a discussion about it. I mean, if you're being terminated because we're not having this spot, here's what's going on, but then if there has been anything in their file, you can say, we've had some issues
And I think
we're
they have a
taking
right
this
to
off.
know that. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I know that school districts in the past, if they wanted to cut costs quickly, they could terminate classified employees. That's a budget issue, but if there's an actual problem with an employee, I feel that it's only right that employee knows that, and if they can change, that's what I'm saying.
I think, and to kind of support what you're both saying, all of this is going to come back to policy because this is a reflection of what's in our policy right now currently. So we have a couple of different policies on classified staff. We also have policy on reduction in force. And so I think that
But,
as a
those
board,
policies are state statutes.
yes.
And the other
Yes,
thing to
but
the other thing to remember with at-will employees is that they don't have any grievance recourse.
Right.
So once the termination has been made, they don't. Our certified staff have an opportunity to grieve their position to retain that position, but the classified staff, if we say you're done, there's no matter what's in your file, there's no grievance process for that position.
Yeah, I don't, as a good employer, I don't agree with that. I know it's law, but just because it's law doesn't mean it's good practice.
And we're trying to show a good front as a school district. We're not McDonald's. Like, we need to treat our people with respect.
Right. And to finish what I was saying about policy, like, our policies have to align to what's required in the state, but just because this is what the state has said is legal does not mean that we can't do something more or better. So if we as a district decided that we wanted to create a policy of a progressive disciplinary action or of potentially a grievance process, I think as long as we're not breaking state law, that is our duty as a board and as the leaders of a large employer, is to determine what we want those processes to look like.
Unless they decide you are breaking state law by setting up your own recommendations and rules to follow, they could say that you are not following a state statute.
Yeah, I can reach out to Bobby and see what he has to say about that.
I mean, I think there are plenty of examples of employers in our community that have their own internal policies that allow for the communication with staff members if there is a disciplinary issue.
Yeah, but they're not school district.
But they would still be considered classified employees in the state of Nebraska. I mean, so I think we have some wiggle room. I am by no means suggesting that we are breaking state law or that we should break state law. But I think, you know, these are policies that are going to be reviewed in August. And I think Cindy brings up some really good points of, we've said over and over again how important those jobs are to the functions of a district, whether it's custodial, whether it's secretarial, whether it's, you know, any of our classified staff. And I don't ever want to communicate to them that they are disposable. Like, I think we really need to be careful about the language that we're using.
Well, and I appreciate Dr. Rhodes being willing to take it to the attorneys, because if this document does carry the force of policy, then we need to just be really careful also of what we're putting in it. So, because that's something that the attorneys, if we are ever in a situation, that they're going to be the ones that are going to have to defend whatever we've done. So.
I agree with that. I just, you know, I feel strongly about this because I did work for the district, and it's just something as an employee, I think, just to have, you know, a warning and call you in and say, hey, you've done this wrong.
But sometimes that's not a possibility. So just so that you're aware of that too.
Well, I think
Dr. Rhodes, maybe you know this, is the Nebraska at-will, as far as an at-will state, is that an act?
I believe it is, yes.
And maybe Bobby would recommend putting that within language?
Yeah. I think we can put more language in there for sure that has, you know, that carries that statute. So we all know what situation we're talking about, and I would say don't make assumptions that didn't happen. You know, I feel like my integrity is being attacked a little bit.
That is
Well, that's the way I feel.
And I apologize because
Well, that's fine. I will tell you, in the 3 years I've been here, I've never operated that way. And in the 8 years of being a building principal, I never operated that way or was told to operate that way by a superior of mine. So this, maybe it's coincidental, this is coming up, but that's all I'm going to say.
Dr. Rhodes, I understand what you're saying, but in the past, not you.
But it's not the past.
Well, what I'm talking about is, so let me finish. We have had employees who have called because they have been threatened by their superior, and the superior wants to go in and just let them go. And if there has been issues, has not said anything about it or nothing. I would like, as a board member, to know that not even you, any of the superiors, building principals, whatever, need to have that discussion with the person. The head of that department would have been the person the situation I'm talking about, would have that discussion with that person. And that would need to be in policy so that you can enforce that that person did that.
I think that there are a lot of emotions surrounding this. And I do think, I understand, Dr. Rhodes, why it probably feels like it's in relation to a specific situation. I can personally, just through my time of being employed in the district and as a community member and on a board, I can think of several times that this was brought into question. And I don't think anyone's intention is actually to direct that towards this situation. I think it is slightly coincidental that we're reviewing handbooks, and you know, when something is kind of brought to your attention, you probably do pay more attention to it. I think that really our role as the board should be to provide you the support and backup when necessary to let employees go, and some protection for the employees if there ever is a situation where something is in question. I think our role is to create an environment where there is a mutual trust and where there is support to do what's necessary in a situation. So in my mind, having clear language actually reduces some potential liability. Even though Nebraska is an at-will employment state, there are still reasons that people could file for wrongful termination. And those are real concerns that we should be aware of, whether it be for discriminatory reasons, whether it be for whatever their alleged reason could be. I think that having a clear process removes some of that concern from us as a district. So that's my intent in having those thoughts, is really not to be accusatory that something wrong has been done, but to be...
We need to hear from Bobby, and let's stop this because it's going nowhere, this conversation. We need to hear from KSB thoughts on this, specifically how it follows the state statute. And I know some people, you know, you may not agree on that, on the way things go, but that we are an at-will state. And this happens all the time. So I think hear from him, we'll understand what it is, and then we can go on.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm great with hearing from him.
I'll reach out.
I will respectfully disagree that I don't think this conversation is going nowhere. I think it's actually great.
Right
that
at this
we hear.
moment, it's going nowhere.
I feel like it's productive at this point still. I mean, I think that it is important to address concerns. So I will agree. We should definitely hear from Bobby and kind of defer to that recommendation. This is something, just so you're aware, that I have already been in contact with NASB about, and they did not have concerns from a legal issue. Now, granted, they are not attorneys, but they do have clearly a lot of experience in working with boards. So I will just put that out there. Is there anything more on employee handbook? Questions, comments, anything like that? Kevin, similarly to my comment to Brandy, I have just some formatting things that I will just email you. I don't think they're things that are worthy of taking up meeting time. And then just a thought that I had as we were kind of referencing this document and talking about policy, I think it might be beneficial if both of our handbooks, when policy is referenced, if the number is there, and even if we linked, like where the number is, linked it to the policy on the website. Because that way, if at any point a policy has been updated and maybe the handbook isn't updated yet, that live link is always going to be the most current reference point. I think that would be, and I noticed there were a lot of examples in here where you had already put policy numbers, and that was actually really helpful for me when I was reviewing the document.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't put the links, because I didn't know if people would really use those, I didn't take the time. I had it a couple years ago. But yeah, we can put links on.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be great. I appreciate
And
that.
in the future, I'd like a red line of the updated handbook for us to look through so that we can just go through it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great idea.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Okay.
Thanks, Kevin.
There are a couple of revisions here to policies 5015, protection of pupil rights, and 5018, parent involvement in education practices. And we kind of alluded to a couple of these things earlier in regards to our conference. So Dr. Rhodes, would you like to share with us the rationale on these
Yep.
and the recommendations?
So Emily mentioned LB 428 that was passed this last legislative session. And kind of the biggest change with the parental involvement policies, 5015 and 5018, deals with the implementation of student surveys. And so if you remember from the session, this was Senator Merman, this was one of his, I think it was his priority bill. So 5015 is actually federally mandated with parental rights. So the only change on that is letter D was added on page 2 towards the top. And it just simply says the district will also comply to the district's policy on parental involvement and education practices, which is 5108. So that's the only change on the federal that is required. And then if you looked at the red line on 518, a lot of changes. It went from 3 pages to 5 pages. But again, it's on the administration of surveys and then the parental rights that go along with that. So we must provide communication on the various methods that we give out surveys. We must also give parents an opportunity to opt their student out of that survey. So there's some timeline requirements in there as well. And really, as we kind of talked as a cabinet team here a week or two ago, you'll see NAEP in there. Sometimes we give the NAEP assessment. We're one of the schools that is chosen for that. That would be a survey that we do communicate out with parents, and they can opt out of that. But we used to do a risk survey with Community Connections. We do not do that any longer because we knew that this was going to become law, and we'd probably have a lot of parents opting kids out. So if we're asking for any type of demographic information, we share that with parents, and then they have that opportunity to opt out. So those are the biggest changes with 5018. Interestingly enough, this was amended last year at the same time because there was legislation that went through that had changed the parental rights at the state level as well. So.
Correct.
And the pressing of having this on the agenda tonight is there's a July 1st deadline with adopting these changes.
These had emergency clauses.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Yeah, both did actually.
Yeah, so both of these are going to be down below in our action items.
Yep.
And so when we get to that point, if you wish to discuss further or think of a question, you're sure welcome to. The attachments are up here above in the discussion items. Does anybody have any comments or questions on them? I mean, we don't have a whole lot of choice in these changes, so.
You have no choice.
I had a note that KSB said something about 15 days. And
I did their webinar a few weeks ago.
So, okay, I just, at the conference, I had written down that they had mentioned 15 days, and there was some discussion about whether it was calendar days or business days that we needed to give the notice to parents. So,
yes, was that in Cody Pruitt's
Well, I think
session?
that the 3 days is, they have 3 days to opt their student out,
okay.
if I remember correctly.
But we are supposed to give them 15 days notice before
Yes.
the survey, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do, now that you say that. Yeah, because there was a lot of discrepancy, and is that calendar days, is that?
Yeah, there discussion about
A little unclear.
whether, yeah.
Yeah, that 3 days that is highlighted in the red line is notification from the parent to opt out. And I think that is specific to NAEP because that is a national assessment.
And it seems like the consensus from both sets of attorneys was that it should be calendar days, just for sake of reference.
Yeah, letter C under number 7, notify, let's see, I just saw the 15. The school district shall at least 15 days prior to the administration of the survey. So yeah,
Okay.
that 15 days is
Okay.
Okay. think of anything in the meantime, you're sure welcome to discuss that when we get to it as an action item as well. For the time being, we will move on to our discussion on revisions to policy 3024. So if you remember, this was a policy that we discussed at our last committee of the whole meeting, and I think we had some questions on the clarity of the language that was used. There had been something that had been removed that was in the original version, so we added that language back in. I think there were still board members that still felt like maybe it wasn't super clear in the language. So you have an attached revised version there. Joanne, I know that you had also emailed over an addition. Would you like to share? Because I thought that your addition might be something we want to consider.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull that up.
So while Joanna's looking for her notes, the difference between this version and the one from the board meeting was we added in the consult and provide information. We didn't have that in there before. And so I do think that definitely makes it clearer that an employee can be at a special entities meeting if they're there to consult or provide information. So that's the difference between this one and the one from the regular board meeting.
So the wording, and I guess you're just going to have to imagine this in your head. So
I can send an email with your language.
I said supporting entities are separate entities from the district and the board, which that's already in there. District employees may only participate in a supporting entity's activities as a member, officer, or director of the supporting entity. Again, that's already there. So then there's a comma, and it says not in their capacity as a school district employee, and I felt like that just added some clarity to that. And then district employees participating in their capacity as district employees. I had a question about language, so I'm going to leave that out for now, but district employees participating in their capacity as district employees may only do so as a consultant or to provide pertinent information to the supporting entity. The question I had that I left out was that we could put in there under the direction or approval of the building principal, and I felt like it should be important for the building administrator to know that there's an employee who's attending these meetings in their capacity as a district employee, whether it's by assignment of the principal or whatever. I just feel like it's important. That's something important for the building administrator to know. So whether the principal has asked them to be there or the principal specifically has approved their being there. And then furthermore, in-school announcements for supporting entity-sponsored functions must clearly indicate that the supporting entity is the sponsor of the function, and that's just kind of a cleanup of the way that the wording is put in the policy, so.
Yeah, I like that, and I like the idea of the building administrator knowing, because the employee might be there just we'll say PTO as a parent, you know, and it would be good that that administrator knows that, and that if they have actual questions for consulting purposes, that employee can say, no, you need to ask the principal.
Well, and I feel like building administration is generally at those meetings, but not always, and so sometimes they may assign someone to go to a meeting in their place, and so I just
that language kind of covers the situation.
And so that just kind of covers that situation.
I think you're probably going to want to change that to an administrator, because your building principal with Booster Club isn't going to, I mean, that's the function of the AD.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose you could say a building administrator is the AD.
We can change that however we need to. I wasn't really clear on what to put. I just know in my experience when I've done PTO in the past, usually the building administrator is there, or they have asked one of the teachers to be there in their place. So just, that doesn't really matter to me. Just want to make sure that, you know, somebody knows that somebody's there in their official capacity. to answer questions or to take things back to the building principal if that's what needs to happen. Because, I mean, we want these to be a partnership, and hopefully the PTOs all realize that they're operating, they can't just do whatever they want in the school building. They need to have permission to do various things, and so I think it's important that there's someone there who can kind of guide that a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I need to leave. I have to take my wife to Lincoln. I was hoping we got to policy 336, but we did not. But I have to get going. And you all, other than Cindy, you all know what I think on that, and I'll stand by that.
I have a language proposal that I'm going to make on that too.
You got to go.
Emily will get to email it out.
Yeah. Well, we aren't going to vote on it. Right?
No.
I'll draft your language in and get that sent out.
Thank you, Skip. Yeah, I think my recommendation would be that we utilize your language, Joanne, on this policy with the change from building principal to administrator. Because I think that that's a great update, and I think it reads much more clear. I read that and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that means, versus having more questions. So I really appreciate you putting the time into doing that. Any further discussion on that policy? Okay. We will move on to a discussion on revisions to policy 3026. This is the policy that discusses handbooks, and there was some language in there about the board approving handbooks, which is the purpose of much of our discussion tonight, so that we can take action on that in the near future. But then there was additional language in there that those handbooks could be changed, and the conversation that we had was about whether or not those changes needed to come back to the board, what level of changes needed to come back to the board. So now that we've all had a little bit of time to think on that, there is a proposed draft version up there for you or attached. But I would love to hear, as you've thought on that and maybe done some research elsewhere, whatever it may be, I would love to hear the board's thoughts on this.
I like how this is worded. In those handbooks that we read, it said the Board of Education, and it threw things back at us all the time, which is fine. But I don't feel like changes should be made without our approval of it. So I think any changes made after the handbook's been approved will be presented to the Board of Education for approval prior to implementation. Sounds good.
I like the addition of that word administrative changes, because we did have some conversations about like directory level information. And even when it comes to board members being listed out in handbooks, mid-year in January, we redo our board officers. And so even little things like that would change mid-year. I don't think those things need to come to the board. But I think things that would be administrative, I think that that's very appropriate. And Dr. Rhodes, will you clarify that second paragraph in there? That's what kind of covers us by KSB's recommendation.
That's required,
okay.
Required change from KSB, that you don't have to provide the handbook in its entirety if it's been amended. All you have to provide to parents and students is the amended pieces. So.
I think that's probably their preference, honestly.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's great. Okay. If there is no further discussion on that, we will move on to policy 3036. And I do want to make sure that we kind of reiterate what Skip's concerns were. I don't want to speak for him, so I will just sum up what he shared at our last meeting, since Cindy, you were not there. And I do want to make sure that his voice is heard in this conversation. So there's discussion about this purchasing card program policy, or P-card policy. And initially, I brought this up as I was reviewing this policy. There's language in there about the board having the authority to take action to either grant P-card authority, it's been a long meeting, sorry, I'm losing my words, or to revoke that. And so that language was already in our policy, but it was a little bit unclear about how we would ever go about doing that when that's not information that's routinely provided to the board. And so that's kind of where this conversation started, is whether or not we maybe need to clarify some of that language so that information is accessible. Skip had raised some concerns that he felt like this was overstepping as a board, I believe is the word that he used. And so he is adamantly not in favor of making this change to our policy. Angela, I know that after we tabled this issue, you had a question that you were not able to ask, so I wanted to first give you the opportunity to ask a question if you have one.
Well, I was just wondering, because I know when we do the monthly audit, we know who had those cards. So was just going to ask, like, isn't that information that we already have? This is just ahead of time finding it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you wanted to go in and line item each card out and keep track of a list of them, that is information that's already provided to the board. So it's not like we're asking for something we don't already have. It would just be in more of an organized fashion rather than flipping through 40 pages of, credit card transactions, having a list. Yeah, yes. And Dr. Rhodes, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that you're already going to be providing at the state level in August. Is that correct? A list of those users?
To the auditor of the state auditor of public accounts.
Okay. So I just want to clarify that we're not adding work to somebody's plate by making this request, that it's something that's already going to be compiled information. So if we request it on the same timeline, that might be a reasonable approach to it. I would be very curious to hear board members' perspectives, because I think that this is, while it's a small change, as far as just adding a simple line, I do think it is an impactful change, so I want to make sure that we do it with a lot of thought and discussion.
And this isn't like a super long list, is it? Like, how many P cards do we have out there?
94.
Well, I think we need to talk about that. Wow.
That is a longer list than I thought it was going to be.
On the P cards, just as a point of information, is there I know there are cards that aren't, well, okay, I believe there are cards that are not assigned to a specific person, but there may be 3 or 4 people in a department, or 2 or 3 people in a department that are authorized to make purchases on the P card for that department, right?
Yeah, we have some of the departments, activity office, high school office, and administration, that we have 3 or 4 different cards, because we don't want to issue cards to every individual in the district. And so in the process, they have to check it out, they get all the proper documentation, then they have to bring back a detailed receipt accordingly and return all the documents to each individual department. But they first must sign a P card, understanding of their requirements before they even can venture out into wherever they're going to go, whether it's traveling to an event or something else.
So I guess my follow-up question then, is the vision that this list includes every person that could possibly use a P card, or only the P cards that are assigned to specific people?
My thought would be probably whatever that requirement is that we submit in August, that the board kind of follows suit in a similar fashion. In my mind, that would be if there is one that's authorized to a specific person, that we see that. If there's one, for instance, I think there are 5 of them that are nurse purchase cards, that are nurse 1, nurse 2, nurse 3, nurse 4, nurse 5. I think seeing it at that level is appropriate, because we know what department those are assigned. You know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily need a list of every single school nurse. If I wanted that information, I could probably find that out elsewhere. But knowing that there are 5 cards available to school nurses is probably the important information. That's my thought.
I don't know that we could put everybody's name, because I know that I've signed out for a P card before. I mean, I didn't use it, but I went to some conference and you had me sign up. Just in case I needed it. And so, I've used it that one time, and I think that was like 5 years ago when I first got on. I think that was the first conference I ever went to. But I've never signed one out before, so I don't know that, my name would need to be on that list, or yours, or
Well, so I guess my thought is I don't have a problem with the language of us receiving a list of the cards, because as Angela mentioned, it's something that when we do the audit, when we review the P card transactions, if it is assigned to a specific person, then we already know who that is.
Well, or we can ask, like, oh, this is the SPED department, and then you say, oh, I don't know, Eric, you did something, or
yeah, and they will tell you who did the purchase. The one part that I was having a little bit of a problem with, and of course Skip is not here, I am having a little bit of difficulty with the language that says that the board may take action at any meeting to authorize additional users or to revoke or suspend user privileges. And my thought is that I feel like there needs to be maybe some language about a conversation with either the superintendent or his designee, which in this case would be Dr. McDonald, because I feel like if we're revoking or adding user privileges, that it should be under the advice of either the superintendent or our business manager. I don't feel like we should just be like, yeah, we're just gonna take everybody, take this person's card away and take this person's card away, and so that's kind of my thought, is that maybe we need a little bit of clarifying language with that, because my hope would be that we would have a conversation, and that there should be a conversation before that action is taken. But I mean, especially in the instance where we're revoking a card, it could be because, of another disciplinary problem or something like that. And so I don't feel like the board should just have total power for suspending or adding
So I totally
users.
understand what you're saying, but I'm wondering if that wording is in there, because that's not something that we just put in there, or that we're changing, is in case, and we don't have to do it now, like it's not even an issue, but if we needed to suspend or terminate the superintendents.
But I think you're still going to be having other conversations before you did something like that, so.
Probably, right. But I still think it needs to be in there.
I think it is situational. I could see either way being appropriate. So I think when you're talking about like an individual, like if I were to be like, I think we should revoke, Justin Thompson's P card privileges, that would feel kind of inappropriate for me. Justin's like, please do. No. Justin doesn't have a P card, just to clarify. I'm just using a name. If it were on a name or an individual basis, I think that would be inappropriate for a board member if there were not a recommendation or some sort of documented reason for that. Where I think that language could be limiting to a board is, and I've done a lot of research on what other districts have for a purchasing card program. So after Skip had raised his concerns last meeting, I am absolutely willing to be wrong in a situation. So I spent a lot of time, like 6 hours in the car, reading other policies and seeing what other districts are out there. I've consulted with NASB on this, just to make sure that I was not out of line in my request, because that is not my goal. And what I found was that a lot of district policies actually outline right here in their policy who can have a P card. And so their policy would literally read, individuals holding the following titles may be assigned an individual purchasing card. And it would say superintendent and building principal and director of finance. And it would have very specific titles. So I think that the board needs to recognize that that is within our purview and authority to determine that at that level. Not on a name-by-name individual basis, but on like a broad spectrum. Do we think that every director should have a P card? That should be something the board can say yes or no. Not, do I think this person? Do you see what I mean? So I think there's got to be maybe a way that we can marry that language to continue with having this, but not be getting into the weeds with this
The names
level.
and everything. Well, it's kind of like what we're doing in our other policies, where we're taking Brandy's name out and just putting her position. We're taking Stuart's name out, putting his position.
Sure.
Putting the positions of the department heads.
Sorry, I didn't say anything. I will also say I found in my research of what other districts are doing, there are a few districts that use the same language that we currently use. As I mentioned, there are a few that have very specific authorized users mentioned. And there are actually some districts, there are several out there that have very similar language to this, that their district, that the superintendent will provide a report. So there is precedence there that is something that other districts do. There's actually one district, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Millard, actually has in their language that in order to be issued a P card, you have to go through training and take a test. So I actually feel like even adding this language in there, we are still quite a bit more relaxed than some districts out there. Now, there are some on the other end of the spectrum as well, and I don't think we should have people take a test. But I think that there's all across the spectrum of how districts are handling it, which gives us a little bit of room to have some discretion there as a board. Is there any more discussion or questions on this? I think my comfort level on this policy, I personally am not comfortable with 94 credit cards in our district. I feel like that is probably something that as a board we need to take a little bit of a look at. And I am not saying I have an answer or a recommendation. And I know that Skip had a lot of concerns about this. I think my recommendation might be that the board doesn't take action on this policy yet at our next meeting, and that we maybe take a little bit of time to continue thinking, to continue researching, to let Dr. McDonald kind of get settled in his role. Maybe he would have a recommendation, and bring it back for discussion at a time when Skip can be here as well, to share those concerns as well. So that would be my thought, is that maybe we bring it back as a discussion item in a couple weeks, but that we don't take action.
Because if there is something that's on a board member's mind and something that they feel strongly about, I think it's only fair to have the discussion with them. You know, it doesn't feel good when you don't feel like your opinion matters. So I think we should make sure he's here when we have that discussion.
Okay. If there is nothing more on that, we will plan to revisit that, and we will move on to our action items for the evening. So the first one here is to request approval to amend nationwide 403B withdrawal parameters. So Stuart, will you kind of share for us the reasoning behind this? And
every year we go through the review of the nationwide 403B plan. They had discovered that we had plans set at age 65, and technically to align with 403Bs or IRAs, they're at 59 and a half, and all they wanted to do was redo the language. They were trying to get it done before I exited, and so the issue became there was a section in there that I had to sign. So that was the reason why we had to make the amendment. And all it's dealing with is adjusting the age down to the standard 59 and a half.
Okay.
Seems pretty good.
Straightforward.
Yeah.
So I would entertain a motion to request approval to amend nationwide 403B withdrawal parameters.
I'll make a motion to request approval to amend the nationwide 403B withdrawal penalty.
We probably need to say as presented.
As presented.
Just so we know. There we go. Is there any, now that we've got a motion on the table, are there any questions or discussion around this? It seems pretty straightforward. Okay. Sheila, roll call.
Cindy O'Connor.
Aye.
Skip Alter. Angela Blazy.
Aye.
Justin Thompson.
Aye.
Joanne Green.
Aye.
Aye.
Before you leave, Emily, and I think it was Cindy, needs to sign.
I got things for Joanne too to sign. We got all kinds of things for people to sign.
But on that document, I'm just referring to.
Okay.
For
We have to vote
two
that Skip's
signatures
not here.
each.
You recorded the time he left. He's,
Yeah.
yeah, he's excused.
I think we're okay on that. Good thought, though. Okay, on our next action item, 11.2, this was discussed previously. So first, I will entertain a motion to request approval of revisions to policy 5015, protection of pupil rights, and policy 5018, parent involvement in education practices, as presented.
I'll make a motion to request approval of revisions to policy 5015, protection of pupil rights, and policy 5018, parent involvement in education practices as presented.
Second.
Okay, is there any further question or conversation on this before we vote? All right, Sheila, roll call.
Angela Blazy.
Aye.
Justin Thompson.
Aye.
Joanne Green.
Aye.
Emily Garrett.
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. And for our last action item, we have here to request approval of resolution on Lodge Association or other similar organization, adding Dr. Damon McDonald, Associate Superintendent, as an account signer with Nebraska Land Bank. And let's see, do we need a motion on the table before we have Cindy read this?
I'll make,
I'll entertain a motion.
yeah, I'll make the motion to approve. There, man.
Just say so moved.
So moved. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, awesome. All right, Cindy, you're up.
The association named on this resolution resolves that, number one, the financial institution is designated as a depository for the funds of the association and to provide other financial accommodations indicated in this resolution. Number two, this resolution shall continue to have effect until express written notice of its rescission or modification has been received and recorded by the financial institution. Any and all prior resolutions adopted by the association and certified to the financial institution as governing the operation of this association's accounts are in full force and effect until the financial institution receives and acknowledges an express written notice of its revocation, modification, or replacement. Any revocation, modification, or replacement of the resolution must be accompanied by documentation satisfactory to the financial institution establishing the authority for the changes. 3, the signature of the agent of this resolution is conclusive evidence of their authority to act on behalf of the association. Any agent, so long as they act as a representative capacity as an agent of the association, is also authorized to make any and all other contracts, agreements, stipulations, and orders which they may deem advisable for the effective exercise of the powers indicated in this resolution from time to time with the financial institution, subject to any restrictions on this resolution or otherwise agreed to in writing. Number 4, the transactions, if any, with respect to any deposits, withdrawals, rediscounts, and borrowings by or on behalf of the association with the financial institution prior to the adoption of this resolution are hereby ratified, approved, and confirmed. The association agrees to the terms and the conditions of any account agreement properly opened by any agent of the association. The association authorizes the financial institution at any time to charge the association for all checks, drafts, or other orders for the payment of money that are drawn on the financial institution, so long as they contain the required number of signatures for this purpose. 6, the association acknowledges and agrees that the financial institution may furnish at its discretion automated access devices to the agents of the association to facilitate those powers authorized by this resolution or other resolutions in effect at the time of issuance. The term automated access device includes, but is not limited to, credit cards, automated teller machines, and debit cards. The association acknowledges and agrees that the financial institution may rely on alternative signatures and verification codes issued to or obtained by the agent named on this resolution. The term alternative signature and verification codes includes, but not limited to, facsimilate signatures on file with the financial institution, personal identification numbers, and digital signatures. The facsimile signature specimen has been provided on this resolution, or that all filed separately by the association with the financial institution from time to time. The financial institution is authorized to treat the facsimile signature as the signature of the agents, regardless of whom or by what means the facsimile signature may have been affixed, so long as it resembles the facsimile signature specimen on the file. The association authorizes each agent to have custody of the association's private key used to create a digital signature and to request issuance of the certificate listing the corresponding public key. The financial institution shall have no responsibility or liability for unauthorized use of alternative signatures and verification codes unless otherwise agreed in writing. This resolution supersedes resolution dated, is today's date?
No, that would be the date of the last time that we did signature cards, so it'd have been last January when we added the new officers in. Yeah.
Okay, if not.
That'll be filled out by the bank.
Okay, if not completed, all resolutions remain in effect. I further certify that the association has, and at this time of adoption of this resolution, had full power and lawful authority to adopt the resolution stated above, to confer the powers granted above to the persons named who have full power and lawful authority to exercise the same. Do you want me to read the names?
Yeah.
Secretary Cindy O'Connor, President Emily Garrick, Vice President Joanne Lundgren, and do you want the Director of Finance, Dr. Damon McDonald?
Sorry we made you read all of that. That is tiny print. My eyes were spinning, just trying to follow along. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, any questions about this before we vote? All right, excellent. Sheila, roll call.
Angela Blazy. Aye. Justin Thompson.
Aye.
Joanne Lundgren.
Aye.
Emily Garrett.
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor. I didn't hear you, Chance.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
Justin Thompson. Joanne Lundgren.
Aye.
Emily Garrett.
Aye.
Cindy O'Connor.
Aye.
Angela Blazy. Aye.
Meeting adjourned.